Hello, and welcome to Coffee Time. Coffee Time is a space where magical humans come together for some real talk, strong coffee, and powerful introspections on whatever is top of mind right now. My name is Natalie, and I am your host for this channel and today's super exciting conversation. The idea behind Coffee Time is that you are in your favorite coffee shop, maybe cozied up with a book, and you begin to listen in on an intriguing conversation between folks at the next table over. For that reason, there is no big introduction. We absolutely let the conversation speak for itself, and if you do want to know more about these special guests following today's episode, I invite you to check out the show notes for more details. So on that note, let's dive right in. My cat just came to say hello.
Oh,
Yep.
oh,
Every time. But no, you're fine. How is my volume and everything?
I think we sound good. Sounds good to me. Doesn't sound too loud. Doesn't sound too. Seems like we're pretty well connected, hopefully.
Cool. Yeah, we'll do the best we can. Now it's probably picking up my cat's sounds. But anyway, we'll see. So
I haven't heard it yet, or I haven't heard your kitty yet, so
I might
hopefully
hear
we
him in
won't
the
have too much
recording.
trouble editing.
Yeah, it's his purring, but like we just it's real life. It's fine. It's a Saturday morning. I haven't finished my coffee yet. The cat is gonna make sounds because he is protesting not being given his dry food, but he needs to eat his wet food. And this is why we'll never
I thought
have
most
children.
cats love wet food. Oh my God, seriously.
He's he's a weird one. Yeah, he likes the dry food, but he likes anything crunchy. So like if I leave a chip bag unattended, he is in it head first. Like I came in once, I kid you not, he instead of a coffee table, I have two of those glass laptop tables, which is nice because it doubles as a TV tray and like whatever, right? I came in to him on top of a glass table that is supposed to only hold 15 pounds, and he is like 19 pounds with the chip bag on his head.
Oh, dang.
And as soon as I walked in, he lifts his head. So the chip bag is like inverted and he's trying to eat the chips as they fall onto his face. Like, this is my cat. Yeah. So
He just sounds like somebody just so desperate for food. I just imagine him like, I think I have a family member like that just like eats everything in sight and just is desperate for food. And
but then
I couldn't help but think of that.
He won't eat things that you would expect a cat to eat. Like, he's very bizarre that way.
Right.
But he loves chips and he loves pork rinds, but he can't have them because he's on special food. That's also like, of course, it's a case of like 24 small cans is like $110 and he's refusing to eat it. So
Naturally.
Right.
Naturally.
Yeah. So it's like, oy, I'm just probably for the best that it's just him and I through this quarantine situation because it's a lot. We're a lot. Yeah. What we were planning on talking about was this living passionately, really, in like, I think we initially
didn't even mean to.
Business, but really it's every aspect of life. And it's so timely that we are diving into this conversation because I have taken a step back from like everything. I even deactivated all of my Instagram accounts last week. And like, who knows by the time this goes up, if they'll be back or not. But as of now, I had this like deep knowing really that in order to figure out what's next for me in like a incarnated human sense of the term, but I think really it's like to get in touch with what is truly happening now and more of like my soul, but I'm not fully clicked into it. I needed to fully let go of everything that I had built. And I mean, the YouTube channel is the one exception because it always has been kind of more of a natural, free-flowing sort of thing. So it allows me to continue to explore that. But otherwise, I just let it all go. And talking about following like passion, but like also being able to tap into that what is aligned right now, which I think is when we had first spoke, what I'd mentioned, because I had said to someone at the time with business stuff, like, I'm just so excited to be doing what I'm passionate about. And they're like, oh, well, that's not sustainable. And for me, this transition I'm in is proof that actually it is, depending on what level you sort of associate that passion with. And for me, it comes down to that following what's right in the moment. And that can be fluid. And in that sense, I can always live passionately, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think, it's interesting that somebody had said that, because the way that you said that, they said that it sounded like in their mind, they thought that was just the way it is. Like they've
Mhm.
never challenged it before. And I think what you're doing, what I love about what you're doing, is that you are just taking everything off the table so you can let go of preconceived notions that you may have built and challenge everything that you think you know, and then be able to come back into it with like a fresh set of eyes. I think that's incredibly important. And I'm guessing, I'm just going to go out and, take a stab in the dark, but I'm guessing that person probably said that because maybe in their mind, passionate, like their definition of passion is, I have to love this and be 100% hunky dory with this every day, all day. And if there is any time where I question if I want to do this, or if there's any time that's not an Instagrammable moment, or that is, rough or anything like that, then that means that it's not going to work. And that's not the case. It's almost kind of like a relationship or a marriage. Like, I don't love my husband every single minute of every single day. Like sometimes I'm like, holy shit, like, is this like, did I make, you know what I mean? Like those thoughts just happen, but it doesn't mean anything. Like, even if I have a thought like, okay, that maybe we need to take a little bit of break, whatever. I can be like, okay, that's a thought that I don't agree with, and I'm just going to let it go and go back to it. You know what I mean? I don't make any kind of break in this like 100% high vibe mean something. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that reminds me too, because at the beginning of COVID, I was reading a book on Tantra. And I think it's kind of that idea of moving from like turn on as like, because you mentioned relationship stuff. So if we go a bit more that way, turn on as this like moment in time, or even we talk about, I'm going to get a little risque here, climax as like a moment in time, and transitioning to like the tantric definition of ecstasy and orgasm, which is more sustainable. And so I think in that sense, if we're talking business or we're talking, I know you talked before, like hobbies, and we can dive into that a bit more. It's about reframing our understanding of the word in a way that is more sustainable and that can kind of follow us through day to day versus being a fleeting moment of experience. And like those might still exist. Like that first moment you get the thought of like, oh, this is the thing that I want to do. I mean, probably, I'm not a scientist, but I would assume on like a baseline chemical response level, those chemicals don't stay forever. Like that's why we keep trying to do these things. But more on like a mental, emotional level, we can make a choice to kind of tune in a way that we can carry on with us. If that makes sense, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate in every area of our life. And I think, I'm glad that you brought up like, climaxing, because it's like, that's such a great kind of like analogy to use, because we can use that in business as well. It's like, I don't want to be climaxing 100% of the time. That would be absolutely miserable.
Sounds
Oh my
exhausting.
God. Yes, it does sound exhausting. And I don't want to feel that way in my business either. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be like on the brink of like awesome, like out of body experience in my business all of the time either, because at that point, first of all, like we talked about it's exhausting. And secondly, it's a plateau. If you really think about it, if you're constantly high all of the time, then there is no high anymore.
Yep.
It's an old saying, but you can't have the high without the low, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, like we're just bring up all these metaphors and they're all tying together so well, but like that was a great one too, because like I share online, like I am now sober, and thinking back to how things were, I always say like alcohol worked until it didn't. And that really resonated, like saying like you're just high all the time and eventually you don't feel it. And that's absolutely true. And similarly, I just shared this, wow, okay, full circle moment. I just shared with someone the other day that early on in my sober journey, and I've shared this story a lot because it was really pivotal, but it has new meaning now, which is also kind of fun. And I think also ties into what we're talking about. I called my mentor and I was like bawling my eyes out on the phone. And she's like, it's okay, it'll get better. And I was like, but that's the problem, because now that it felt better, I was like, how much worse is that neutral I was living going to feel if I go back there for even just a moment? And that was my fear. And then what I realized recently with this huge shift that I've just mentioned is that unknowingly, I think maybe because it was necessary for where I was at, I've been reliving that day for the last 7 years because I haven't let myself fully dream big into possibility of what things could become, like outside of what I knew. And I've been living peacefully, which is a tool I can take with me no matter what, but I wasn't allowing any sort of expansion. And I don't like those words because I feel like they get really overused in the online space, like manifesting and expansion and alignment. And so I always talk about them a bit differently, but the way that expansion came up for me when I was journaling the other day, which made sense, is expansion is what happens. I forget exact words that I use, but when I fully integrate my soul into the physical experience and allow it to take me beyond the confines of the physical. And so the soul is here to expand this experience in a way that strictly physical cannot. And so that for me is what's coming up, is like a big spiritual shift and integration. I can't tell you what that looks like because I'm like in it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where that has fell to for me, like more recently.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting definition of that. Like, it's so funny because like what you just said, I intellectually agree with. I am more like the person that thinks like, I guess more kind of like in terms of like logic and things like that instead of like intuitively. But I do want to step into that. But it's like for me, when I heard that, my brain was thinking about like possibility versus probability.
Yep.
And I think it sounded like what you were talking about is that, you know, we all live like this. We all have default thinking of probability, and all that probability thinking is what we've been able to accomplish in the past, like what we've done in the past, and that like everything that has happened to us in the past and what we were able to manifest, what we were able to bring to life, things like that, right? From the past is what we're thinking. Like if we take the past and look, like put those past goggles on and we look into the future, we don't see as much, right? Because we can't have imagined everything that we can do based on what we have already done. But when we shift into the possibility thinking, and especially in business too, like if I were to keep my probability glasses on, then I would stay in corporate forever. You know what I mean? Because that's all I had ever known. But it's like I had to take the probability glasses off and put the possibility glasses on in order for me to even take like the strength to step into something new.
For the record, in my degree, I did mostly formal logic. So I totally get where you're coming from with all of this, because I am analytic by necessity, not by default. So growing up, I was much more in the like continental stream of philosophy, like English literature, etc. Because I didn't know that the study of logic was a thing. And then I got to university and was like, I cannot, my friend put it really well the other day. He's like, I cannot argue something so subjective as the existence of a metaphor for an objective grade. And so that is when I scrapped the literature and I went full on into logic and cognitive sciences and other analytic philosophy, like philosophy of language courses, which I think comes through in a lot of what I talk about. Because it's like, but what do we mean by this word? Like, what is this really doing? And like, what is the impact of it, right? And that's huge. Like even talking about just now expansion. And before this actually came up when you mentioned climax and how you were talking about it. If I kind of map what you were mentioning onto maybe practical, but also connecting it to spiritual, it's that sense of like, as much as we want to live up here and like high vibe, whatever, we need to be grounded. And like that can be grounding in a spiritual sense or like a chakra sense, but that all also connects back to, sorry, there's a garbage truck outside. It's going to be loud, even though all my windows are closed. Like physical, right? Like standing in the ground and feeling that connection. Or like business, like maybe that's more of the pragmatic, like you tell me, but pen to paper and like planning things out and like getting super clear on your dream client, but in terms of actually how you describe them, not like, oh, it feels so lovely to work with them. Okay, no, like what age range are they? What, like, where do they live? What do they do in their spare time? Like all these things. And the practical sense of how do we help them? Not like, I want them to feel better, but like, how many weeks do you need? How many hours do you need? And I think it's that balance between the two is so crucial to create sustainability. And from that sustainability to allow us to live, if we loop it back to our kind of main topic of the day, to allow us to live passionately with those ebbs and flows as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely. And just, I liked what you were talking about when we are like digging deeper, like actually planting our feet into the ground and getting much more clear. Cause it's easy to kind of like skim the top of our head and be like, oh, I want to help people feel better. And it's like, well, that's so vague. It's like, you're not even explaining to me what I'm getting out of the process. So, it's hard to be able to dig down deeper because all of the kind of like top of the stuff, like top of the head kind of stuff is really easy to just kind of spit out. Right. But it's not until we dig deeper that we actually reconnect with that purpose. It's when we live like, it's a little bit easier to skim off the top of your head when you talk about like what you want to do, what you're passionate about, things like that. But it's not until you get deeper where you actually get reconnected back to that and grounded again too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also really important. And what I've been finding with my exploration is because getting super clear like that also really drives back to trust of self or spirit or, whatever your perspective is, but something outside of the perspectives you see online or whatever communities in the lists that other people generate. Because it's like when all that falls away, like who's left steering the ship, right? And for me, it's like, it's me. And recently I'm like, it's me at the forefront, but I have like maybe my guides, or I use the term God loosely, like backing me up. And there's this connection I can go off of, but it's not other people. Right. And kind of figuring out what that perspective looks like for you as an individual, so that in those moments where you feel lost, like you have a way to find clarity that actually sits well with you and like feels okay, and not forcing someone else's plan onto your circumstances.
Yeah. Or like looking for that outside validation that you are on the right track, or, trying to look at, just like what you had said, looking at somebody else for guidance and then just kind of accidentally falling into their footsteps and recreating their life. And it's like, you won't ever be able to recreate their life as well as they did because you're not them. You know what I mean? And so I loved how you're talking about like being able to look at something higher or bigger than yourself. Like, I'm not particularly religious myself, so this was something I really struggled with for a long time, because it's like I was very kind of analytical, thinking like, okay, so this is what I can do. I need to do X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. And it's after a while, it gets exhausting to do that because yes, all of the responsibility is back on you. And I think it's so easy for us to kind of look to mentors or look to accountability partners and things like that and share the responsibility with somebody else. But at the same time, when we do that, we don't get to take credit for when we create something. We don't take the responsibility for when something goes wrong. So we just kind of sit and stagnate for a while. But I think when you can connect to something bigger than you, but still is within you, I think that's a really big difference, because it's not only on you anymore. However, it is still you.
I got chills as you were saying that, actually. And I love that what you said about we don't get to take credit for it. And I think the other part of that that's coming up for me is when that coach or that mentor or whoever is not in your life anymore, how do you move forward? Right? Because I mean, like, and right now, like I said, I've taken a step back, but something I realized for myself was like, at least at the point I was at, I didn't really want to roll people over into another program. Like, that's not how I'm meant to show up. Some people are, but for me, like, the idea with supporting people in any sense of it is eventually might take longer for some, and that's okay. But the point is to help them get the tools they need to move forward in the way that's best for them in whatever capacity I'm showing them that, or we're showing them that, or whatever. And so exactly that, it's like, maybe in the now, like, I show up to help someone figure out what's next or whatever, but long term, like, they get the credit, like, this is their life, this is their path, and with that they need the tools to be able to figure that out for themselves as they go forward.
Absolutely. Because I mean, the old saying, but like, give a person a fish and, they eat for a day, and, you teach them to fish, they eat for a lifetime. But it's like, also, I think I don't want to sit here and sound like I'm bashing that if you ever ask anybody for advice ever, then you aren't doing it right. I think maybe a way to do that is to challenge yourself to be like, okay, how can I take this advice, and what is it about the advice and my thoughts about the advice that are going to work for me? It's not the advice itself, or not the other person itself, that's giving me the strategy or giving me the steps to where I want to go, but it's actually how I comprehend what that person said and how I made that advice work for me. Because that's taking the credit back for yourself. That's taking the responsibility back for yourself. And I think that's what's really empowering, especially in business, or especially in, bringing your passions to life, is that, when you can take that responsibility on yourself, you aren't ever really stuck. You know what I mean? You're not ever really waiting for something to happen to you. You go make something happen.
Yeah. I love that. And I think on the flip side of it too, showing up to give advice, for me at least, this is a personal thing. Like there's very few circumstances where I will give direct advice / feedback to someone. Like, I don't think that is my purpose, because the right step for them in this journey might not be what I think it is. I think advice is really, for me, like I've realized one of my gifts is being able to hear what goes unsaid. And so often it might just be repeating a sentence that came up for me that the other person didn't say, and saying like, does that resonate for you? And the other part of that is sometimes it really doesn't, but that can still help them find where they're going. And that's really powerful. But the point of that is like, I'm not telling them where they're going, because like, it's not my life. And I mean, that goes for anything. And I think even in more extreme circumstances, the thing that maybe is more objectively right as a step to take, that person still might not be ready. And I can't pull someone into that space. I can hold it for them for when they're ready to step into it, and then be there to help when the time comes.
Yeah.
That's how
100%. I think it's more helpful, especially as coaches, or I resonate with what you said 100%, because like when I think about working with people, I feel like my job is just to ask why over and over, but like really more deeper than that, than to just be like, why, yeah. But really deeper. I think the point of like working with a coach or working with a mentor, whatever you decide to do to help you bring your passions to life, your business life, things like that. I think the purpose of that is to have them question, like, or challenge. Have them challenge like what you think is fact about you, what you think is like the truth about you, but really what it is like you have an opinion about yourself, and your opinion about yourself could change. Your opinion about the world can change. Your opinion about your possibilities and your abilities can change. It's just when somebody can point that out to you and challenge, like, hey, you're saying this a lot. Like, why are you saying that? Like, what are you making this mean about you? That could be incredibly powerful, because that forces you to kind of like think it's not top level stuff anymore. Like, it forces you to get deeper. It forces you to kind of like ground into like who you actually are, and bring that to light.
I love that. Yeah. And it, a couple episodes ago with a friend of mine I've known a really long time. He knew me during that transition from the metaphor world. He's the one that said that, actually. We were talking anarchism. And now I am not deeply ingrained in anarchism, but the baseline of what I know so far that I feel comfortable sharing is questioning default scripts. And I feel like doing this within your own life, maybe, don't quote me, because this is really just me thinking as I go. This is the part of Coffee Time where there's like the unfiltered, really raw introspection that could be wrong, but it's food for thought. And then we can go and reflect on it after. Is maybe the act of questioning those things, right? That internal dialogue, as I often call it, or that narrative that we have for ourselves up until this point, can also be an act of like rebellion against those scripts and those narratives that maybe we've been taught or we've internalized from seeing them. And through that is also a way towards liberation in whatever we're doing. Yeah, I feel like there's more to think through on that one, but just a thought. And like, for me, that comes up, you were talking about God. One thing I've been realizing recently for myself, I always write God with a lowercase g. And I haven't fully unpacked this yet, because I have people come to me like, oh, well, I don't believe in God. And I was like, well, do you see that? It's not capitalized. There's a reason for that. And that's like my rebellion against that script that I was taught. It's like, no, you know what? I get to use this word how I want to, and this word doesn't have to divide people in the way that it has. Like, this can unify, and it can have so many meanings and nuances that show up differently for everyone. And that's why I use a lowercase g, and I still choose to use that word. Like, I define my terms. And that's my rebellion against, the Catholic upbringing that I had, that told me if I wasn't a certain way, I didn't belong and I had nowhere to go. And that's not true. Like, I get to create my belonging now. And so that's like an example of where I've done that for myself. And I think, like you're talking about in business, in hobbies, however that comes up, and more like the practical things in life, is where we get to articulate that in a more like outward way, I suppose, as opposed to purely introspective. And that is super powerful, because by doing that, we're also showing other people, like I'm showing that person I met at that gathering, like, no, you can live passionately every day. It's not what you've been told. Like, let's see how this shows up for you. And that's pretty magical.
Man, that is so wild. Like, I am totally on the same wavelength. I grew up Catholic as well. Like, a lot of what you just said about religion and God and things like that are exactly how I feel as well. So I just had to say that because I am with you 100% there. And I actually think it's interesting that you brought up kind of like a baseline kind of definition of anarchism and things like that, because I actually use like, speaking of kind of like analogies again, like when I think about limiting beliefs, or I think about like the way that we view ourselves, our lives, and just the world as a whole, it's like bringing down a dictatorship, right? Like the only way that a dictatorship is strong and it keeps going is by putting out information and having nobody challenge it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But all it takes is like one person to be like, yo, why are we doing this? Like, do we really actually need to follow this guy? Is he right? Like, can we just do something different? And then it's like, when one person starts talking, the rest of the people start talking. And so when I think about that, I think about that as a thought, like in our head, like we have a bunch of thought, like we have like our dictator, you know, in our, you know, the kind of like negative version of ourselves is kind of like the dictator I think of. And they are like giving you a lot of evidence for why you can't do something, why, you know, you can't live passionately, whatever. And then, you know, you have a lot of thoughts that support that. But it's like, once you have that one thought that's like, hey, do I actually have to keep thinking this way? Like, what does success actually mean to me? Can I redefine what failure looks like to me? Things like that. Like, then another thought starts to come up like, oh, wait a minute. No, I don't. And then it's like a cycle. It's just like how dictatorships fall. And so I had to bring that up because I was so on the same wavelength. I was like, I love that. This is so good.
Yes, no, that's amazing. It's kind of funny because I've been challenged, but like, well, yeah, it's easy for you to have conversations because you talk to people who agree with you, but like, you don't have to agree with me. I also love that I feel like we're really bringing up like this really fun snowball of thoughts for each other, which is just like all what this show is about. So I'm like super happy about that because this is like, to anyone watching, this is exactly how my conversations with friends go at coffee shops or wherever. And I end up sitting there for like 4 hours. And that's why at a certain point in time, I was like, I need to just record this. And I love that we just jumped in and started kind of going off on all these things. Because I don't know about you, but like that's how I show up with my friends. It's not like pop culture and this and that. Mm-hmm. It really is these questions of like, are you questioning the default scripts in your life? What does that look like? What's problematic about that? And like on we go. And it's fun and we can challenge ourselves and each other and hold each other accountable and learn. And, you know, it's like, I just love that growth that happens and that like co-creation that happens when you meet someone in a space like this and allow these conversations to flow.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And, you know, I think it's actually easier to do something like this. I know a lot of people think that speaking like this and really kind of getting deeper into like your thoughts and like the scripts you were just talking about is hard to do. But honestly, I actually think like keeping it high level, like surface level is actually harder because you're constantly like, ooh, is that weird? Like, I don't want to go too deep. So we talk about celebrities or pop culture or whatever. And I think that's actually harder because you consistently put out like your rebuilding this wall or like things like that. And it's like, I'm too exhausted to keep building a freaking wall around myself every day, right? Like, if you want to come on in, we're going to talk about some deep shit and just be ready for it, you know?
Totally. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I am an introvert, extroverted introvert, because as you can tell, I can talk at your off for like ever. But that's the thing too. Like if the connection is not, don't want to say it in a selfish way, but you know, just for the purposes of getting this thought out there, if the connection is not giving me something or like, you know, kindling that fire in some way, I'm not here for it. And I think that's what I realized with deleting my Instagram. Honestly, right now, like I was forcing myself to show up on there because I had to or something like it. And I was forcing myself to stick to this branding because I'd created it and I'd started to transition my posts over to it, but it didn't feel right. And so I just said, fuck it, and burned it all down. And like, yeah, it felt awesome. And it's similar with connections is like, I don't want to say if it doesn't feel awesome because I don't like putting that like, if we go back to the church upbringing, like, I don't think everything is a good, bad, positive, negative. But I think even like more difficult or challenging conversations can still feel stimulating, we'll say, and like intellectually stimulating. And that's what I find interesting. Sometimes I'm not ready for it, and that's okay, but that's what I go for. And if it's not feeling that way, like I'd rather just sit on my couch and watch Netflix or read a book, because if I want to numb out, I'll do it alone. Like I don't need to do it with another person. Yeah.
I mean, I love sitting at home and like, I'm not going to lie. Like sometimes like I'll get into the trashy, like by myself, the trashy TV shows. Like if I just want to stay like that kind of like, you know, sensationalized, like sanitized level, I'll exactly like what you said. I just rather do it alone and get it out of my system. And then when I actually go try to be with somebody else and connect like in some sort of a way, because I feel like that's what I kind of look for, is like something meaningful, something like a way to connect with another human being. And I just don't think that you can do that really when you are only focused on keeping it sanitized.
Yep. I like that. I just sanitize. That's interesting. I haven't used that word before, but I like that. And yeah,
I didn't either until just now. And I'm like, wait a minute, that okay, I think I'm going to keep that.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's like preventing ourselves from getting into the messy and the learning and the whatever. But sometimes it's needed. Like sometimes I need to just recharge that way, but I do it alone. It's rare that I want to do that with another person, because that's not where I find value in interpersonal connection.
Agreed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So now I do want to ask you some more, like, not so much surface level questions, but more of like interview style questions, because this is your jam. And I know we've talked about like, you know, passions and hobbies, passions in business, and we've just like spit off a whole bunch of stuff. That's awesome. But for like,
we did.
the average human, like what would you usually go to as a first step for figuring out what you're passionate about? And I know you've talked about like not just passion in business, because not everyone is looking to create passion in business specifically. Like it might be gardening or whatever. Right now I'm actually building a wall of plants because my neighbor likes to yell off her balcony and I have no privacy. I went out there the other day to like journal, and it's 8:00 in the morning on a Saturday. And she says, good morning. And like, I'm fine with that. Like, yeah, good morning. Like, nice day out. Yeah. Okay. Chit chat, done. Right. No. She kept trying to have a conversation. And then she'll go out there and like yell at noises that happen, like full on scream. And like, I swear it made me jump one day. Like there's a whole lot more going on. So I don't want to be judgy of that. I also want privacy on my own balcony. So I've started, I've actually, as you talk about being tired building walls, I have started building a wall on my railing. literally, of plants. So I at least have a bit of privacy. Because I mean, also, I don't always want to like,
I don't blame you for
wear
that.
pants. I don't know. So, yeah. Right.
I feel you. I mean, I think it's different. Like you going out to meet somebody at a coffee shop, that's different. You know what I mean? Than you going out to your balcony with a journal. Like that was intentional time that you were thinking would be for you. So of course you're not in the right headspace to have a conversation with another person, like shouting at them from a different balcony. Like I'm with you 100%. I'm like, there's only so much that we could talk about the neighborhood and the weather, like that I'd start to just get exhausted.
Well, yeah. And that's why I was like, okay, saying good morning is fine. But when it's like noted that I am looking down at a paper.
Yes.
That's where this stops. Like, anyway, so talking passions, what is like a go-to first step? Because it like we talk about it and it's like, yeah, just be passionate all the time and you can do it. But like, that's not accessible for everyone, right? Which makes sense. It wasn't always accessible for me. And honestly, day to day, it's not always accessible. So where do we begin, my friend?
I think looking more withinward is like a really great place to start. And so what I mean by that, I know that sounds really vague. What I actually mean is like, thinking about like identifying who you are and being able to define who you are without relation to other people or stuff. So usually I do this with every client that I have, but it's like, I usually ask them, I'm like, okay, tell me about yourself. And they always list off if they're married, you know, what religion they are, what job title they are. They give me a lot of like titles or like what car they drive. Like I'm a Jeep driver, you know, things like that. And so it depends.
I'm a Jeep driver.
Usually they start off with something different than that, but you know, if they exhaust all of the other options, then they start talking about the stuff they have. I'm a homeowner, like stuff, you know what I mean? But I will say my husband's a Jeep driver, and they all like have this secret like hand wave, even if they don't know each other. And I'm like,
Oh, it's so
like
true. There's like a secret club for Jeeps. I mean, they're really cool, so I don't blame them. But yeah.
Right. Same. I mean, I like being in it, but okay. But you know what I mean? Like, it's so easy for us to be like, okay, who we are is dependent upon everything outside of us and everyone outside of us. And so it's really easy, especially if you don't know what your next step is, or, you know, if you're like in the 9 to 5 and you're miserable and you want to be doing something else or whatever it is, it's easy to be like, okay, so this was my job title and this was all of my experience and this is what other people say about me. And that's going to dictate what I do in the future. It's kind of like the probability versus possibility mindset, right? Like we always look to the past and what we've had and what other people think about us to use as a gauge for what we can do. And I think that's where we get off, because that's where we don't be aligned with who we are. And I want to get deeper on alignment, because I know a lot of that's another kind of hot word that people use. But I think the way to actually truly realign with actually who you are is to let go of like who you are to everybody else. Like if you were on a desert island by yourself and there was like no chance of like somebody being around you, not a camera, like literally you're on a desert island. Yeah, literally, like who are you on that island? And so I think what that
not
is
lasting
like
long.
Able, well, yeah, I mean, you have food, don't worry, like you're good, you're gonna live. But I think the point is like, you know, being able to see who you are like without everything external, right? And so I think the fastest way to do that is to see what your core values are just as a human being yourself. Like, and so these are things like, I like to think of them as personality traits that you admire about yourself, the personality traits that you respect about yourself and that you want to magnify as you continue in your life. And so when you define what those are, like maybe you're empathetic, you're compassionate. For me, sustainability is one. And I was in the fashion career for years. And for anybody that doesn't know, the fashion industry is horrible on the environment. And so I was completely out of alignment because one of my core values is, you know, being sustainable and things like that. So that's just kind of like an example, is to be able to define what all of those are for you. And once you have those defined, then we can start looking at activities that, or jobs, like if you want to go into a different career, or businesses that align with that, because it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's passionate as in fun all the time every day. It just has to be more aligned with who you are at the actual core.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that relates a lot to what I talk about when I talk alignment as well. And those lists and the things and everyone, you know, like for me, it's come up a lot in conversations around partnership. And yeah, okay, so you have a list of all the characteristics of that person, right? And I think you can start there. So like similar to this, like maybe someone has those, you know, like Jeep owner, homeowner, and maybe that's all they have right now. Like that's okay. And like an example I've used is like, okay, so I love that this person has a dog. Like my ideal partner has a dog. Okay, well that's like I mean, maybe you just love dogs, but they have a dog, they take it to the park every weekend. That's like part of their routine. How do we map that back onto a personal core value that doesn't have to do with that other person and what they're doing or what they have? And so maybe it's just, not just, but like being an active member in the community. And that could look like having a dog going to the park. It could look like going to the farmer's market on the weekend and knowing the local vendors. It could look like a whole bunch of things. And then we can take it back to, well, how are you, like you said, like what job, what hobby, whatever, how are you living out that value in your day-to-day life versus just seeing this other person doing it in a very specific way? Because I think the other part of that comes down to when that other person's not there all the time doing this thing 100% all the time, how do we fulfill that for ourselves? And how can we fulfill it for ourselves? Or what other relationships do we look to? And I think that's also like, you know, when the business, like maybe correct me if this doesn't fit with what you talk about, but my thought would be when the business ebbs and flows and maybe we're not feeling super turned on and super passionate one day, or like you mentioned with your partner, like there's days where it doesn't feel 100% all the time. Like that's normal. But what do we do in that moment to kind of balance that out, right? Like where else can I turn to fulfill that? So maybe it's like, I mean, not right now because COVID, but like maybe I like going to like group fitness classes, or I want to go for a walk in the beach to just like level out or whatever. Kind of figuring out where that balance sits for us and how we can explore that passion when it's not 100% there in this one area of our life all the time.
I totally agree. And I think just being able to kind of like take the more surface level, like what you were talking about, like I like this because of why, or like I'm looking for this in a partner because of why, or I'm looking for this in a passion because it's gonna afford me the ability to create the schedule I want. Let's kind of connect the dots between why that's important to who you are. Why is that freedom in your schedule that you want in a business important to who you are? What do you want to do with that extra time? You see what I mean? Like being able to kind of continue to question or challenge, your thoughts, and challenge yourself to dig deeper, because that's when you can actually find what it is that is something on the days that don't feel super hot, like on the days that don't feel super great. That connection to why you're doing what you're doing is going to be able to pull you through those days when you're not 100% like passionate,
Absolutely. Yeah. Or you just like don't have the energy, because that happens.
Yes.
100%. And what you'd mentioned reminds me a lot of my current situation about the like letting go of all that stuff. And I feel like that was kind of what I did with the Instagram, was I let go of all these preconceived notions, because if I didn't do that, I couldn't fully open up to like, what am I passionate about right now? Or what's my possibility right now? And sometimes it does take like fully letting go of whatever it was so that we can move forward. Sometimes we can rearticulate. Sometimes we can just make a more organic shift, like whatever it might be. And I think that's okay too. And I've done that before and it worked great. It's just not what I needed right now. Like I needed to fully let go of that almost like expectation and pressure that I felt from that little like a microcosm that is Instagram in this case, so that I could create the reality that I'm wanting to live in for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's so easy to get lost in like when you think like, I think of like it, for Instagram, for example, like I use that as like a really big part of my business because I actually enjoy being on it. I've made it to where I like being on it. And so at first, like there are times where I'm like, okay, so this is a part of my business. Like this is how I reach people and help them. But then I know like that's where I really get connected to the passion, is getting like DM from people being like, oh my gosh, this has been extremely helpful. This shifted something for me. That's why I do what I do on there. However, sometimes it's human and we get lost in the like, okay, this got this many likes. No matter who you are, if somebody says they don't care about things like that, they're lying. Like, you know what I mean? Like they care at least at some point. Like maybe they don't care about it overarching, but like we're all human and we all look for external validation when we don't catch ourselves. You know what I mean? So it's like, you can tell that you're out of alignment when you're looking at things that aren't the most important. Like likes, follows, things like that are not the most important to me. Like what is the most important to me is actually being able to help people on there. But I know I'm out of alignment with who I am because my core value is compassion, it's an empathy, things like that. And that's why I'm on it. But when I shift over to looking at things that are more surface level and focusing on that, then I get out of realignment again. And that's where I start to lose the passion in my business, is because I'm focusing on the things that aren't actually aligned with the core values. So when we come back to what's actually who we are at the core, like popularity is not a core value of mine. So it's no wonder like when I'm super getting into the analytics of Instagram and like how many views my stories gotten and things like that, it's no wonder why I feel out of alignment with it. You know what I mean? So it's like challenging ourselves, like, okay, how can I come back to this with a fresh set of eyes and reconnect to why I'm doing any of this?
Absolutely. Yeah. A friend of mine, actually, I shared with them like, oh, by the way, I realized I didn't respond to your message and I deactivated all my accounts. So I'll message you on Facebook now. And they were like, yeah, I've actually been thinking a lot about how I use Instagram versus how people kind of show us that you're supposed to use it. And I think for me, the not feeling aligned part was, because I'm feeling such a big shift in potentially business, but just like general, whatever it is that I'm bringing into this world for healing and support. And like, I don't know what that looks like yet. Is it business? Is it not? I don't know. But because I was feeling a need for that to shift, but my Instagram had been built up around what I was doing, I couldn't let that shift happen until it went away. And so for me, that's where that not being aligned was. And I think that's where I felt that jarring when I was trying to push out content, was because the content wasn't funneling to what I am meant to be doing right now, but I also don't know what I'm meant to be doing right now. So that was where, exactly like you were talking about, like, where is it not feeling aligned? Like that's where it was for me. And At first I felt like I was supposed to be scared about it, because it's like, oh, Instagram. But but as soon as I realized, like, I just need to let it go. Oh my God, it felt so good. And now I'm just really, and it's only been like a week, but I honestly have I still have my cat's account because like people love him, but I only have even
That's important.
gone on it like once every 3 days to even look at his. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I just have Christoph's account. Look at some cats and like put it down and I'm good. It's like, that's been really awesome too, to just recognize that I clearly wasn't that attached to it. So like I have made the right choice for me right now and it can come back if I want it to.
Absolutely. And I think just being able to be self-aware enough to be able to be like, is the actions that I'm doing aligned with like who I want to become, what I want to bring into this world? Like, is this action going to actually make that happen? And is the way that I'm doing this action going to make that happen? Because it's easy to check mark a bunch of things off of the to-do list. But once I start feeling that my business is becoming my to-do list, then I'm not passionate about chores. Like, you know what I mean?
Nope.
Like, I am not passionate about cleaning my house. Right, exactly. Like, I do it because I don't want to live in filth, but it's not like I love being able to scrub stuff. You know what I mean? And so obviously, like, but I look at the way that I clean my kitchen and I'm like, how can I make this more enjoyable for me? How am I, like, in what way can I make this action more aligned with who I am? So maybe that's doing it with my husband and having a conversation about what we heard on the news, or like having a deeper conversation about that. You know what I mean? Making these actions I don't want to do aligned with who I am. And so I think when you're in your business and you're thinking about like all of these actions and they are unaligned with who you are, like, question the actions, but also question why you're doing the actions and question the way that you're doing them too.
No, I think that I love that. And I'm all about it. I mean, I'm living it. And I think it's really awesome too, just to like give that permission, because we can feel stuck. And like you said, like, why? But it's easy to feel stuck, like we have to. And so I also think it's important to add, like, if it's not apparent right away that why is coming from some sort of pressure or something else, like if it's like, well, because I need to do it for this, and it doesn't feel like there's an alternative, like, that's okay, because that can take time to feel through. And maybe it ends up that, if we're using the Instagram case, like maybe it ends up that Instagram is the platform you want to use. You're just going to change how you use it. And that's really what this was pointing to. So it could, and I say that to people when I've been working through the like church upbringing and, purity culture stuff. And it's like, we can challenge the script that was taught to us. And sometimes challenging it just re-articulates it in a way where we're telling it for ourselves versus having it forced on our situation. But the principles might not actually change, and that's okay. It's just like you said about the other thing, I think, like doing it in a way where you can take credit. And in this case, doing it in a way where I have agency over my own life. And that's what's really powerful.
That is incredibly powerful. And it feels really empowering to do that. Like, you are giving yourself the authority to take action in the way that you want to. And that doesn't mean that you have to overhaul your whole life. Like when we talk about challenging the scripts or challenging the way that we learned how to do something from somebody else, that doesn't mean that we have to go like drop our religion, drop our drop the preconceived notions, but like, it just means that we get to redefine it in a way that actually works for us and makes us feel like we had control over it. Because I think about like, when somebody tries to force you into doing something or guilt you into doing something and you do it, then you don't really nobody feels great about it. Like the fact that you did it, right? But it's like when that becomes your own idea to do something, then everybody enjoys it. You know what I mean? Like making that kind of thinking in that way, like make what you're doing your own idea instead of thinking it's something that you need to do because somebody else told you that, or that's the way you learned.
Yeah. It's like, I always like the analogy of like picking up your favorite pen and rewriting your story. And I think the day that I realized I could rewrite my story, or like, it's like a create your own adventure book. It's not like predetermined pages. It was a really powerful change for me. And I think I'm at now like in the next level of what that looks like. But it's like, pick up your favorite pen of possibility and like,
literally, yeah.
You get to decide. Yeah. Right. You get to decide what comes next. I mean, it might not always look exactly how we envision it. It could change in time, whatever it is. But I think it's just opening up to the fact that it can look or we can experience it differently. Yeah.
Yeah. There was, I love analogies, but there's an analogy
I've
I was
noticed.
chatting
Yeah.
about with, I know, I feel like it just paints an easier, like clearer picture to understand. But like, I was chatting with somebody about like being able to write the rest of like your story. And it's like, if you don't feel empowered to be able to write, like be in charge of designing what your life looks like instead of living it by default, it's kind of like going to a coffee shop and being like, I want a coffee, and not like talking about what exactly you want. So the barista is just going to give you a black coffee. You know what I mean? It's coffee, it's still good, but it's like, if you were to come up and take charge of what you want and be like, you know what, I want this because of why. Like, I want almond milk because I'm vegan, or I don't know, whatever. You get what you want in the way that you want it. But if you just leave it up to somebody else to be able to write that story for you, or to be able to do that, all you're going to get is a black coffee. You know what I mean? So it's just being able to take charge of that.
And I want to be the person who like underground invented the unicorn frappuccino secret recipe that Starbucks baristas didn't know existed, right? Like that's what we can move into. I love that's so funny and so perfect, because I was drinking my coffee and I like turned it around to hide the branding, but like I don't know if that matters. I don't think I'm that famous. So just like, just in case, right. I can't afford that shit. Yeah.
For real.
Right? No, I absolutely love that. I feel like there's been so many juicy bits in this conversation.
Yes.
And I really appreciate everything that you have shared. And I don't know, do you have any like parting words? You don't have to, but anything that's coming up for you that you're feeling a pull to share as we kind of wrap up today?
Yeah, I think just overall, if there's anything that like anybody listening has gotten out of this conversation, it's just to be able to give that authority or to yourself to be able to challenge why everything is the way it is in your life, and that you have a lot more say over what your life looks like and how you feel about your life and how you feel about the actions that you're doing, right? Like the more we can challenge ourselves, it's so against the grain. It's so against what we're taught, because we're taught to be, it's in our DNA to literally just be a part of the pack and be accepted into the part of the pack and to not question anything, right? Like that's how dictatorships form. But it's like, once we start to challenge ourselves in the way that we think and why we think the way we think, that's when we shift from the probability into possibility. And that's when so many things can change for you. So that's my last parting words.
I love that. And I think the thing that came up for me too, because I know that can still be a lot, like we've talked about making it more practical, but that can be a lot, is even if maybe someone is in the place of just feeling like they're kind of rubbing up against whatever they're being taught and they don't know where to go, like that's still such an important part of this process. So like give yourself credit for the fact that you're noticing that. And if you're just noticing it, like that is still everything right now. And that's huge. So like, don't let that discount the fact that you maybe don't feel like you're making huge moves to like re-articulate your whole life story. Just observing where you sit right now and how it's feeling is so important. And so I just think it's important to also like give permission and acknowledge that.
I 100% agree. And I think that's such a great kind of thing to remind everybody of, because it can feel so like when we question our entire or challenge our entire lives, it can feel so overwhelming. But just being in that like place of cognitive dissonance, you know what I mean? That's incredibly, like when you feel the sandpaper kind of rubbing up against you and you're like, don't know where to go. Like that is the catapult that will like launch you into what you need to do. Just trust in this, and trust in the graininess, trust in the uncomfortableness. Uncomfortableness is actually sometimes a good thing.
Trust the sandpaper, trust the catapult is really what we're saying. We've gone medieval.
Literally, yes.
No, I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I really appreciate everything you've shared. I'm so glad that we finally got to do this.
Yes.
Yeah, just thank you for being here and holding space for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Coffee Time. Before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if today's show resonated, I invite you to drop into the comment section and share whatever personal introspection came up for you today. Anything you can do to help make the show more accessible is super duper appreciated. Until next time, I am your host and coffee drinking companion, Natalie, wishing you a beautifully caffeinated day.